Hello, my name is Kevin Lopez Pelaez, and I'm a psychology major in the College of Science at Florida Atlantic University. I conducted my research through FAU's Business and Economic Polling Initiative, and I titled it American Sentiments on Behavioral and Cognitive Qualifications Within Public Officials. Before I go ahead and get started, I want to explain and outline how my research presentation will go about. So we will begin with the background and introduction. After those are mentioned, we'll move into both of my hypotheses. After the hypotheses, we'll go into my methodology and data, and then I'll break down specifically by question the results and discussion. After we look at each question, I'll move into my conclusion, my references, and my acknowledgements. So living in a very challenging and interesting time, especially given the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic, we see a diverse and divided political landscape, especially in how that relates to American politics. So as a psychology major, I'm interested in taking a non-traditional, non-political science route to better understand the American political atmosphere. And that is understanding from a psychological and behavioral science perspective and combining the political theories and political science and public policy to then better understand the overall American political landscape. With a combination of such, it's interesting to see the hallmark solution of public opinion research, as professionals outside and inside of academia are able to understand, engage, and better examine public opinion and public sentiment through this research, which really encompasses that psychological and human factor that is very needed in today's American political landscape. With these interests in mind, I formed two questions that I wanted to answer. My first question, how likely is the conduct of public officials to affect the way individuals cast their vote? And my second question of, should public officials be disqualified due to cognitive decline? Through these two questions, I formed my two hypotheses, breaking them down by the demographics that I wanted to study. My first hypothesis being the party affiliation of the respondents, and my second hypothesis being the age of the respondents. Before moving into the questions, I'll talk about my methodology and data. So the data for the study was collected through online surveys using a service called Amazon Mechanical Turk. I collected 130 responses from random individuals that resided in the United States and were all over the age of 18. Once we collected this data, I used IBM's statistical package for the social science to analyze it, and then I would subsequently cross-tabulate this data by the demographics. Looking at the overall for question 1, which is how likely is the conduct of public officials to affect how you vote, we see that over 30% of the respondents believe that it was very likely for the conduct of public officials to affect how they vote, with 60% of the respondents believing that it was likely for the conduct of public officials to affect how they vote. And it's interesting to see how in this research and statistical application, we're treating likely as a probability and very likely as a certainty. Moving forward with the same question, we're going to go ahead and look specifically by the demographic, which in this case is party affiliation. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. So for question 1, I reject my null hypothesis as I found a statistically significant difference at the 5% significance level between individuals' party affiliation and how likely the conduct of public officials affects the way they vote. And it's interesting to see in my research, I did find that Democrats treat their vote impact more as a certainty, whereas Republicans treat it more as a probability. Looking at the overall for question 2, which is, should public officials be disqualified due to cognitive decline? We see that over 75% of the respondents believe that yes, public officials should be disqualified due to cognitive decline, with 19% saying no and 6.2% being unsure or undecided. And it's interesting to see, especially given that awareness and interest in mental health and acuity, that the overwhelming amount of respondents do believe that yes, public officials should be disqualified due to cognitive decline. Once again, looking at that same question, and now specifically by the demographic, which for this question is the age of the respondents. I'm going to once again minimize this. So for question 2, I'm able to once again reject my null hypothesis as I found a statistically significant difference, this time at the 1% significance level, between age groups and respondents' beliefs on whether a public official with signs of cognitive decline should be disqualified from public office. And if you direct your attention to the 65 and over category, it's interesting to see that in my research, I did find that 100% of this category said that yes, public officials should be disqualified due to cognitive decline. In this research and statistical application, we do know that correlation does not necessarily equate to causation. So it would be interesting to see the real world responses in a non-statistical application. So as we talk about and mention the rise in interest and awareness in mental health and acuity and the divided political landscape, and especially to how that relates to psychological testing for public officials, this is something that is already in play and something that is already in motion. So in the status quo, numerous federal and government agencies already require a behavioral and cognitive and psychological testing for their public officials and for officers and employees. So as case studies, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, which are two examples, actively employ psychological and behavioral testing for all of their officers and employees. So as a psychology major, it was interesting to use this research to further motivate and explain the necessity for interdisciplinary research between psychology and government and expanding this. Through the expansion of such and the combination of psychology and government to better understand the overall American political atmosphere, it's interesting to see the necessity of application for public opinion research. As I did mention, for individuals and professionals both inside and outside of academia, it's truly essential. And using public opinion research to better understand, engage, and examine specifically public sentiment is truly a fundamental necessity for our American political atmosphere. And then through this research setting, I did want to mention the existing literature and how this research contributes to the literature currently circulating in academia. There is a very interesting piece that was published by the Oxford Press, which is Citizens and State, which measures those dynamics of trust between public officials and the public in Europe. And it's interesting to see those dynamics, and especially to how that relates to my study of understanding the trust between public and the cognitive abilities or cognitive decline or psychological abilities, if you will, of public officials. So in my references, I did highlight the reference I stated, Citizens and State, in case anyone is interested in further reading. Moving to my acknowledgements, I have to give a huge thank you to the College of Business and Economics Department for sponsoring my cross-disciplinary research. A huge thank you to the Business and Economics Polling Initiative and their leadership, Dr. Monica Escaleras and Professor Eric Levy, for their guidance and mentorship, and especially their technical insight throughout the entirety of their research process. A huge thanks to them. I really appreciate it, especially their technical insight on my research. With that, and to reiterate and close, my name is Kevin Lopez Pelaez. I'm a psychology major in the College of Science at Florida Atlantic University, and I conducted my research through FAU's Business and Economic Polling Initiative. Thank you.